For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter. So, Craig, have you tried this new fudge-filled croissant donut? The cronut?
Every time I try, they're sold out, and they're sold out again tonight, so I won't be trying it tonight.
What is that
either.
about? What is that about? Maybe I'll have a coffee here.
They have to be good if they're always sold out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have a vanilla chai and 2 wake-up wraps, so just egg and cheese, please.
Dan, you just hit me. Dan, you just hit me with the brim of your hat. That hat just got me in the eyebrow. I hate when
sorry. You got to be careful. That ace is sharp. Just watch out for that.
Man, so
that's 10-gallon right there.
Good to see you at Dunks here, Dan. What are you getting there? You little coffee too, maybe?
Yep. Yeah. Well, no, I get my vanilla chai. It's only one size. It's simple.
Yeah. They don't
medium.
Wait, they don't do. Oh, you always do medium? Is that the thing?
Well, that's the only size Dunkin' Donuts makes for vanilla chai.
Yeah, right.
So I don't have to answer the question like, what size do you want? Do you want sugar and cream in it? I'm just like vanilla chai, please. That's it.
Right.
That does make it easier.
Yes, I try and simplify my life as much as possible. What are you guys getting?
I wanted to try that new fudge cronut, but it was sold out, so I'm going with.
It's like $2.50, man.
I know.
You buy like 3 donuts.
I know, but it's premium, Dan. Sometimes people are willing to pay premium for premium.
The one time I went to the one in Salem and I got that for like they had a special or something, and I got it for the price of a regular donut when they were first launching them, and I was not that impressed. I don't know why.
So does price really factor in when you think about a donut?
Yeah, for me, actually, the price of now that I'm wearing a Fitbit and I'm tracking my calories, the price in calories
factors in more for me, right? I would pay more for less calories, which is really ironic when you think about it.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's annoying when there's a donut that costs double the other donuts.
Yes, that's
to me
fair.
That's annoying.
But you kind of think it's a croissant donut, Craig. Yeah, what's the other new one they have now? Where is that on the menu? Let's see.
Oh,
it's. What the heck? It's some other thing. Have you seen this? It's like they launched it around. It's like it's like a donut, but it's something. It's not like a scone, but it's something
cronut.
like that.
You thinking about the cronut, the croissant donut?
No.
That's what he already mentioned.
But there's another thing that they just launched as well. I just saw it yesterday. Maybe they don't have it at this location.
I think eventually it's kind of like the gaming industry merges. All pastry will become one pastry.
Like Honeydew,
the muffin,
Dunkin', Starbucks,
donut, Danish, right? It'll be some kind of thing like that. Hey, have you ever wondered when you sit in like a coffee shop like Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, do you ever get that guilt? Like if you've been there long enough, like let's say you got your laptop out and you're doing work or something. Do you ever wonder like how long you can sit there before they kick you out?
No.
You ever thought about that? Or do you ever feel like I need to buy something else? I'm feeling guilty because my coffee's been like empty now for 2 hours.
Yeah, well, in the summertime, I spend 8 hours a day sometimes at Panera writing. And I will make sure that I'm spreading my purchases out over the course. And I'm actually watching all the people around me, making sure over the summer, I had 2 people sit near the only outlet. And they had an entire office. They had 6 electronic devices out.
Right.
All of them plugged in.
Right.
1 small cup of coffee is all they bought.
See now,
I was there writing, going, "Please don't die, please don't die, please don't die." Just really, the rage was just building up.
There. So let me just because there's a segue coming. I think you can see.
Okay.
So you're sitting there, right?
Yes.
At your table, using their power.
Yep.
If you get to the outlet, if one of those jerks isn't using all the power plugs.
That's right.
And you've had 1 cup of coffee, and you feel like, you know what? I'm sitting here. I'm taking up space. I'm using their power. I feel like I should buy something else.
Yes.
Every so often you feel like I maybe buy a little thing up something else. So do you think that happens to gamers when they're sitting in gaming stores? Like, do you think when you're sitting there in a gaming store and you're playing a game for like 3 or 4 hours, that do you feel like you need to purchase something, or do you ever?
Not on the same scale, but it does have I'll want to buy something while I'm there during the day.
Right.
I think it's more of a one and done for most gamers. I would say like that most gamers sort of understand I need to buy something, or I would like to buy something to sort of relieve this pressure, this guilt or whatever, is sort of making me think that. I think the real question is not would you pay to play at the store, right? It's how much would you pay? Because I would pay $4.44 like I just did for my 2 wake-up wraps and a vanilla chai. Yeah. But then if I'm there for like 2 hours, then I'm like, I don't feel like $4 covers it anymore.
Right. See, there's this, and I think some people don't have that moral compass. So I have the same problem, right? So I'll go in and I'll sit down, and sometimes, I've had days where I'm driving into work and it's really bad snow. And so I'll pull into McDonald's and I'll use their Wi-Fi or whatever, and I'm just going to sit here till the snow abates or whatever, and I'll go into work a little late. And I'll get my laptop out and I'll be sitting there, same thing. I'll be sitting there and I'll be like an hour, like, I should really buy something else. I just feel like I'm, taking up space. And so the gaming store is the same way. Like it's sort of like over the number of days. Like if I go into a gaming store, right, and I go in on a Monday or 1 week, the first Tuesday of the month, let's say, and I drop like $200 on a new miniature war game, right? And I paint the models up and I come back the next few days or next couple weeks and I play it. How many times can I come back and play without buying anything else before I start feeling like there's guilt, like I should buy something else?
I guess it depends on how much. I mean, just speaking financially, I guess it depends on how nice the place is.
Well, exactly. And then so it depends how nice it is and how well maintained it is. And honestly, that's true. If like I'm in I just won't stop at, like if I'm making the McDonald's choice, right, I won't stop at a McDonald's. That's like it's a known dirty McDonald's, right? Or it's a known one where the staff doesn't care, or they just slap the stuff together in the back, in the kitchen. So
and that's a pretty low bar, honestly. Right? Like a McDonald's that's poorly run is like it's like the Arby's that's crappy, right?
I know, but I actually do know all the McDonald's between here and Woburn, Massachusetts, that are worth stopping at and worth not. Over my 20 years of commuting, I kind of learned where these places are. But I think it's sort of interesting. Like so then it comes to like this. So recently, right? So Dan, and I know like Myriad has experimented with a bunch of different models in terms of, if you promise to, it's kind of like you prepay for game store credit, right? Like I will promise to buy $10 a month in games, so I'll pre-buy a $10 gift certificate per month, let's say, and that means that I can be there and play there and use the back room or whatever the rules are. But since then we moved on to try gaming other places, and we've been gaming at a local tavern. And when I go into that tavern, there's no rule about having to buy anything. I can just walk in, sit down, and just play games and leave. But I always feel compelled, to buy some food there because I feel like I'm using their space, I'm using their room, and I want them to continue to offer our gaming group space in a room there. And I know that they will only do this if they're making some revenue off of us, right? They're not going to just do it for the hell of it. And so I do that. And I think a lot of our group actually does think that way. Like they go into a bar and they're like, I'm in a bar, I should buy some food. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, I think for some gamers, if it's a store doing that, somehow the store is obliged to offer free space to play, even if you don't buy games there. Do you think there's a culture like that in the gaming community?
I think this is a classic example of tragedy of the commons in the most cases. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a social training that has happened with restaurants specifically that we understand. Like we understand we don't just walk into a restaurant and depending on the restaurant, you don't just sit down, right? If it's obviously a restaurant that you're supposed to be seated at, or sometimes they have that little sign up front that says, please seat yourself. Mm-hmm. If it's like a Dunkin' Donuts or a McDonald's, I can just come in and sit down. But restaurants in general, right? You've been trained that like you just don't walk in and sit down. Mm-hmm. It's not like a library where you can just come in whenever you want, right? That's different than really any other, and I think bars fall into that, like any type of restaurant, right? We know we're supposed to buy stuff, but you haven't had the same training in like what other places do you go to hang out, right? Because there's no expectation that when you walk into Macy's that you buy something, that you walk into Apple Store that you buy something. You're there to buy stuff, right? It's not a place that you hang out. And so I think that's the weird overlap, is that people are going, well, I don't need to buy anything, but I know that I might lose the opportunity to be here. It's just a sort of weird gray area. What other examples of places can you think of other than restaurants where people go for an extended period of time? Restaurants, coffee shops, bars, etc.
I would say a gym and a bowling alley and other things like that. But then you're paying to use the facilities, right? So this is the thing that when I ran a gaming store and we built the store we built, the DACA store, which I've talked about before, and if you want to hear all about that, go back to like episode 1 and 2. So we talked about that back then. And I think there's a lost chapter on the whole DACA thing. But the idea was that I tried to compare it to that because I think you're right, Dan. I think there's this idea that if it's a retail space, even if there's a place to sit in a retail space like Barnes & Noble, right? And I'm not talking about the Barnes & Noble Cafe. Barnes & Noble also started introducing like just these chairs in the aisles of the books where you could sit in this chair and leaf through a book. And lots of people would sit in that chair, read half of a book, put the book back on the shelf, and leave, right? It's just like,
and come back the next day.
And come back
read the other half.
Well,
of the book.
I don't know if they did that, but it's just like they felt like, I don't like this book that much. I'm leaving. I don't feel compelled to spend anything, right? Like that's just how they're okay with that. And you're right. I think because it's retail. Because as soon as Barnes & Noble puts in a cafe, so here's the weird thing, right? So you're in the same Barnes & Noble. Now they got a cafe in the corner. If you sit in the puffy chair between the bookshelves, you can sit there for a while and leave and don't feel any guilt. But if you sit in the puffy chair in the Starbucks cafe corner of the bookstore, you feel like you probably ought to buy a coffee. Am I wrong there? I think you're right, Dan, about the psychology of this, right?
I think it's restaurants. I think it's ingrained.
So now I go to
I don't know what the history of that is.
So now I go to, the gym. So if I walk into, let's say, Planet Fitness or Gold's Gym or pick your favorite gym, I don't have an expectation I can walk right past the guy and start using the equipment, right? I have an expectation I got to pay him. Or bowling alley's the same way. So
but that's using the equipment. I think that's what's different, right? Is that I understand that there's stuff here that I don't have, but just like tables and chairs are not really considered equipment. So if I walked into DACA back in the day, which I did, and when I was visiting, and I said, look at all these awesome tables, like those are clearly something that I would not have myself, right? And so people recognize a value in that. But if it's just like, that's space, it's tables and chairs, they don't ascribe value to that. And I can understand why. That's what are you offering? And they're frequently bringing their own games, right? So if I went to the gym and I brought my own weights, then maybe I would assume that I could just walk into the space and like start working out, I guess. It's sort of weird because there isn't really a good analog there.
Right. So you're thinking this is a brand new, and maybe that's why. So I don't know. What do you think, Craig? Do you feel like is this right? Do you feel like
no? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I've heard this argument from you before, Russ. So I'm always intrigued by the whole where do you feel like you need to put your money and where do you feel comfortable, and the Barnes and Noble example always intrigues me, because I do think there is. I guess does it have something to do with direct supervision? Like when you're in the cafe part of Barnes and Noble, there's the people right there.
Well, I think it comes down to service, right? If you're a server,
that's what I mean. Like there's an immediate expectation of service there. If there's people there serving you, then there's more pressure for you maybe to feel like you're supporting that area as opposed to just sitting in a corner in a chair.
Like I think it's difficult for most people if you did like walk into a restaurant. I talked to some people that own restaurants because I was like, nobody just walks in here. Like you wouldn't walk into a restaurant and bake your own bag lunch and sit down and pretend that you could just eat there. And they're like, oh, you'd be surprised.
You'd be surprised.
Right? Like, so there are those people, but we understand. Like nobody would be like, oh, they kicked this guy out for trying to eat his bagged lunch.
Right.
But if you're like, hey, you can't sit here unless you buy something at a game store, they'd be like, this is tyranny. How dare you? I am entitled to my space in this store. And it's like, no, you're not, right? Like, first of all, it's a private place. But that expectation, if people are walking up to you and saying, oh, can I get you something to drink? Like we all know the script in a restaurant where you have service. Hey, would you like a drink? These are our appetizers. Here's our menu. I'll give you a minute. Hey, hun, can I top you off? Like they're constantly talking to you, right? So to say, no, I don't want anything a bunch of times is really awkward, right? And so I think that might be part of it. Maybe you have more of an active service role. And that's certainly what board game cafes have done, right? Is that they've just taken a very common, comfortable thing, the sort of Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts experience, right? I would say more of a Starbucks experience than a Dunkin' Donuts experience. Dunkin' Donuts is much more of just hey, we come in, we hang out, right? Although I do have Tom, one of the guys who works for us, his entire game group goes to a Dunkin' Donuts every week and plays games for 4 hours.
Really?
At the Dunkin' Donuts, yeah. And they bring in their whole game group, and he said they love us there because I said, oh, so you guys must buy stuff. And he said, oh, yeah, we're buying stuff all the time. Right. And I was like, well, there you go. Like, you're fine, right? Because no business is fundamentally going to be like, I mean, it's the same thing applies. If I were, I just got a quote on plumbing today for a new location, but like if I went to the plumber, every time I talked to him, I was like, hey, can you give me a free estimate? Hey, can you give me an estimate? I have all these questions. Let me ask you all this stuff. Like eventually your queries need to resolve in business.
Right.
And it needs to resolve in you giving money to the person serving you. And so that is a very common relationship for people that deal in business. But if you're somebody who doesn't really deal in business, I think it varies by person too. Let's say you work as like Russ as a cog in a soulless machine of a tech company that you don't have to make deals. Like, you're in a managerial role, so it's different, right? But if you're just like a coder and you never really have to interact with people in that sort of business-like sense, you don't have like, your relationships at work are like, I do my work and I get paid. That's the relationship, right? I think people that have a more worldly sense, that do go out and like interact with people transactionally more often, that is something they have a better sense of. That's what I find in my experience.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's interesting. So this is why I think, so it comes around to like, I think there's and maybe I'm weird this way, but I feel like there is some demand for and maybe I'm the minority. I don't know, but I still feel like it's out there. I feel like there's some demand, or there is a demand by gamers for a place to go play games, right? That's not their home, and it's not necessarily a friends to meet up, right? To meet new people.
This is
for that
third place theory.
The third place, like
third place theory.
Yeah, and there's huge websites like Board Game Meetup, and all these websites that are essentially.
What is the Google third place theory?
It's
third place theory. If you want to find more about third place, you can look on Wikipedia. Mm-hmm. It's a community building aspect that is the social surroundings separate from the two usual social environments, from home, which is your first place, and the workplace, which is your second place. Mm-hmm. Examples are cafes, clubs, parks, and this was all laid out apparently in the influential book "The Great Good Place" by Ray Oldenburg.
Well, don't forget either.
1989.
This isn't a new.
Thank you, Mr. Yarrington.
This is why I donate to Wikipedia every year.
And don't forget, this is not a new idea. There's a reason why things like the Lions Club and Elks Club and lodges and sewing circles and all those things exist. It's because people like to gather, and they don't necessarily want to gather at home for a variety of reasons. And it's not all about work. And ideally, like, think about it this way: there are many, many bowling leagues across the country and other sporting events and things, and they gather at facilities and they pay fees to use those facilities. And so I kind of felt like the model that a lot of game stores are trying to go to is the cafe model, I think. Right. And I think the reason they're going there for is exactly what Dan is saying, that people understand that when you go into, people are always willing to buy snacks while they're gaming, right? It just feels like they don't. It's almost like they'll spend more money on snacks than they will on games, which on the long run is probably true, right? So especially D&D, especially role players, right? Because role players buy the books once and they play for hours and hours and hours, which is what makes the game awesome. So if you can get them in a room where you're selling snacks to them, you've made it, right? Because they eat all the pizza they can get in their hands on. So,
well, that's if you're selling the pizza, though. Snacks is very different, right? Or if you're bringing in the pizza, because you don't sell pizza at the place.
So, but
they don't get any benefit from that, except you get all the garbage and trash to pick up.
Right. The other side of it is, if you can figure out a way to make the facility worth paying for, right? And that was sort of the thing that DACA was, and that's why I always compare DACA to like, the bowling alley or the racquetball club or the lodge or whatever, because I was trying to make it so that this is a place worth entering. Like you actually would pay to be here because this is an experience. Like coming in is an experience. And I think miniature gaming makes this a little easier because there is so much periphery stuff. Like to really have 4 or 5 different tables, for example, that have different environments and are three-dimensionally modeled, and you have a jungle table and a snow table and a desert table and sci-fi tables,
island table,
and a fantasy table, all that stuff. Most gamers don't have the room for that. You might have 1, you may have 2, you don't have 10, right? And you can't host an event. And so that's where these stores could come into play. And I think, and I do feel like, although even with all of that, and when I ran DACA, I would have people come in and say, I'm just morally opposed to paying to play. Mm-hmm. And I would be like, I don't understand. I literally don't understand.
And I think this is a real challenge with, I think it's a real challenge as maybe in the past, let's go back to DACA days, was that like 2002 or something?
Yes, 2005.
Where you didn't have Kickstarter, you didn't have really that much online commerce, right? And relative to the amount that was purchased locally. So it gets even harder. Like the people that were willing to do that because maybe they got 20% off or something, right? That was sort of how they justified it. So like the Barnes & Noble membership, I pay for it, but if I buy enough stuff, I'll earn it back. And then I get to access this space for free. That's their justification, right? Like nobody wants to pay for space, which is very odd because in Europe they have game clubs that they pay for all the time.
Right. Well, the funny thing is, like, it was really ironic to me, which I still haven't figured out, is like the same group of friends that I would hang out with and say, I've got this store. And, you come here and play. They're like, we don't want to do that. But then when the store closed, it was like, you know what? You know what we should all do? We should all get together and pool our money and rent a warehouse and each pay it each month. And I'm like, where the hell were you when I was running a store for you?
I think that's a different thing,
why is that even rational?
Because they're going, I want a place for me. It's sort of this like co-op feel.
Right.
As opposed to like, I don't want to come beholden to you, Russ, and play by your rules and your place, and you charge me money, right? I want it to be, we all just go together and we share the expense and we share the responsibility. Right. And that's why those places very rarely work out, because share the expense and share the reality means you pay for everything and you take out the trash. Like everybody's saying, somebody else do this.
Right.
Nobody's fundamentally responsible for it. I was running the numbers very recently as we were reviewing all this stuff that's going on with Myriad as we're consolidating to one space. I was reviewing the numbers on how many people would we need to get a fairly modest size space, actually, that people could play. And it was tremendously expensive. Like this is not 2002 anymore. Right. Like the mill building spaces, those are all $16, $20 a square foot now.
Wow.
It's crazy. Like, and I have looked at, because for Ship Naked, for the warehouse side of things, we're just moving to a new warehouse space, and we've looked at tons of spaces, and even warehouse space is more expensive than what you paid for DACA space back then.
Wow.
And so you add in, you need to get, like, in the local area, I think it was something like 150 people paying $20 a month just to get to the point where you can cover that expense. So that's why I think really the question is not, are you willing to pay to play? That's an immaterial question, because everybody's willing to pay something. It's just between $0 and $1 million, right? And so most people are either a zero or a few bucks, quote unquote, which is the snacks thing. I'll buy snacks, but like, you're not a convenience store, right? You're not making all that money on snacks. And even a convenience store, they have people come in, they buy the snacks, they leave, right? They're not. Even restaurants, they don't have people come in and stay for 5 hours and spend $10, right? Like, it's crazy, like from a logic standpoint. So if you went more the game club route, I could see that, right? Oh, have like an Elks Club, right? But then all of a sudden you have to get a big membership, right? Or you have to do some sort of nonprofit setup. So it's interesting. Third place, very quickly, these are from the original source, Oldenburg, who's the original author on this. These are hallmarks of a true third place: free or inexpensive. Food and drink, while not essential, are important. Highly accessible. Involves regulars who habitually congregate there. Welcoming and comfortable, as defined by the community. And both friends, new and old, should be found there. So people like the idea, even if they sort of cloister themselves in their own little clique. They still like the idea of like, oh, but I can view this person from afar and sort of find new friends and then choose to invite them into my small group within this group. So those are all interesting elements to think about. Even third places, as they define, I love when people are saying in game stores, well, just become a third place. And I'm looking at this going, this doesn't sound that profitable to me. Like, if this is a business, this is not a profitable business. So I would love to go to, have a game club that I would pay $50 a month for an awesome game club, right?
Yeah, but you're a tycoon.
I'm a tycoon. Yeah, I'm a tycoon. Yeah. So, but I love the people that say like, I can't afford it. And I'm just like, well, this isn't bread. This isn't milk. This isn't even beer. You don't need this, right? Like, you could just not play games or play them at home, or not play them out in public. Like, it's like arguing that I view that as akin to going out to eat and then saying you can't afford to tip well. So if you can't afford to tip, you can't afford to eat out.
Right.
Don't go eat out.
Right.
So I have very little tolerance for that. And I'm obviously biased as a store owner because I've had to deal with the downside of that. But yeah, defining it, because fundamentally it comes back to, we just had this example with a D&D group in our Salem location, where we ran the numbers, because we were just going, okay, we have to cover just the additional labor of the hours that we're going to be open later for this group, not our regular hours, just the later hours, which was like 3 or 4 extra hours that night. There was nobody else in the store other than them, right? It's a group of 20 people or something. So it's not a small group.
Right.
But they all played role-playing games, so they're not buying anything.
Right.
So, and they were sort of operating on the same assumption. Oh, but we buy stuff. We buy stuff. Like, we as a group buy stuff. And I said, okay. And I looked up all their sales, and I totaled them all up. And I said, did you know that on average, per week, not per hour, but per week, each of you spends $2.13.
Right.
And I said, that is not sustainable.
Right.
We need everybody to pay $5, a whopping $5. And I'm really restraining myself from not cussing right now. Like, it's just absurd the amount of value that people get out of that experience. And that we had to have a discussion to get people to go. And then the end result was they were like, yeah, $5 seems reasonable. And so they just paid $5. It went on their account. That way they could spend it whenever they wanted, right? And we had enough money to cover the expense of being open for them. Right. So that worked. That's the sort of thing that if you're in an Elks Lodge or the Masons or whatever, like you have to cover those expenses. That's like a board of directors would do that, right? And they'd say, well, we have to raise our dues because we're not getting enough money. And so I think there's both a perception of a bunch of people who are freeloaders who don't want to pay for things. And you know what they call those in clubs? They call them non-members. That's what they call them.
Right.
And so then there's the people like us who are going, well, we're willing to pay for it for something. Like some of us are willing to pay, but we're not willing to pay that guy's membership dues, right? But we still want them to come here. And that's what would happen in a club, right? I was in barbershop for many, many years, and there were annual dues. And my annual dues were always like sponsored by the organization because I was a poor 12-year-old kid or whatever who couldn't afford to, they just wanted me there as a young kid because these guys were all in their 60s or whatever. Everybody's dying off and they're like, we need to get some new young people in here. And so they would pay for me to go to convention. They would pay for me, and I would have paid for it if I could, right? But I just didn't have the money to do it. It would be $400 to go to a convention or something. And so they would pay for it as part of the organization, but that money came from the organization. It came from the other guy's dues, and they all knew that, right? And so I feel like there is some method if you've had a formal membership structure and a dedicated third place. It's just, there are a lot of expenses, right? Who's going to manage it? Who's going to do all that? That's why this very hospitable Dunkin' Donuts that we're in right now, we're sort of drafting on the fact that they're here already and that all these other people in the 30 minutes that we've been talking so far have just been walking in and buying stuff and leaving. Right. And they're not taking up all this space.
Right. Exactly. We are preying on their ignorance of the fact how wonderful it is, the podcast from a Dunkin' Donuts.
You're right. Okay, Craig, I want to hear your thoughts on that when I get back. I'm going to go buy another Cronut because I feel guilty now.
Yeah, I actually do too. Can you buy me one also? I need a coffee, Dan. Another coffee.
Oh, please. No, I'm eating the Cronut, but now I feel guilty for eating the Cronut. So
could you supplement me for that Cronut?
I don't know if I can. I think you can afford it, Mr. Moneybags. With
indeed,
3 jobs. You got your freelancing and your
working
podcast and your
working hard.
Yeah.
Every one of those is like a multi-million-dollar venture.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't know. It's funny. I think I understand people that don't understand to want to pay for places, I guess, but I think it's just I really don't get why people don't understand the value of. I guess they don't think about it, right? Like someone's got to take out the trash, someone's got to turn the lights on, someone's got to if there's a leak in the facility and the plumbers someone's got to call the landlord, someone's got to. There's a lot of overhead that I guess you don't really appreciate unless you're either A, a homeowner yourself, or B, have run a business and really understand all the extra work that goes into just getting it open every day, right, and keeping it clean.
We just had a meeting at our local church, and it's obviously a nonprofit, right? And it's the exact same thing. They're like, well, we have to pay this guy to like maintain this facility.
Right.
It's this huge church, right? And like you just don't think about those things. And they're like, oh, well, where's this money come from? Well, at churches, it comes from donations, effectively, right? And maybe they get some revenue from other, like they lease out part of their facility or something. But fundamentally, if you go to places like Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia, right? They have this huge space. You know what the back half of that building was when I visited there? Now, this was 2010 or something. I don't know if it's still there, but the back half of that building, it was bingo.
Right.
And that paid for the whole building.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
So the front place was a bunch of freeloading gamers who didn't want to pay for space.
Right.
And they got it because all these old people that were playing bingo were willing to pay to come to bingo. So there's got to be like, I don't know, maybe that's just an is it an age thing or something? Is it like younger generations aren't willing to do that, but older generations are? Is it, the millennials aren't? I know everybody loves to hate the millennials. So is the millennials don't want to pay for anything? They're used to getting things free forever. I don't know what it is. I would argue the baby boomer generation is pretty entitled with, all the stuff that they're used to getting, which are my parents, right? So I don't know. It's a sticky wicket.
I don't know. The only thing I think, the hope I see is, so I was down in New York a couple weekends ago, and I did not, unfortunately, get a chance to go to gaming stores, but I got roundly picked on from some of our listeners on Twitter because I was tweeting that I was in New York and sharing some pictures and stuff as I want to do. And they're like, Russ, you keep coming down to New York, and you don't tell us you're coming, and I want to say hi to you, and would you come to one of these fine game stores? And they listed a couple, and one of the ones they listed was this gaming cafe that you had to play, and I checked it out on Foursquare. Now, Foursquare is a pretty, a younger person's appliance. Most people don't use Foursquare unless you're younger. And I went into Foursquare reviews, and sure enough, it was all like, this place is awesome. You can pay $10 a day and be there all day, and they have a huge board gaming library I can choose from. And they all the comments in there, they got it. Now, are these guys getting enough members to stay in business? I don't know how long they've been around.
Was that the Uncommons?
Yes. So next time I go to New York, I'm checking this place out because it sounds really interesting, and I'm gladly pay them $10 to help keep them going. Have you been there?
We'll do a road trip next time we're down there. But keep in mind, that's very different in an urban environment than in a suburban environment because I just visited my friend down in Queens.
Yep.
Their apartment is the size of the room that I'm in right now.
Right.
Which is my office, right? So there's a reason you want to get out of your apartment.
The third place is more essential in a city. Plus, there's a larger population. So even if only 1% of the population ever goes to a game store, 1% of New York City is much larger than 1% of Manchester and Hampshire, right? So clearly, getting the body count in there to sustain a place like that is much more difficult. So maybe this is something that only works in large urban areas. But I'm really interested to see that. And I think that kind of goes against the generational idea. I think there are people who – but I think for some reason it goes back to how we started this whole thing. The perception of a cafe and paying for food continuously while you're there is somehow more appealing to people than paying to use tables and even access to a gaming library, which you had that going at Myriad too, and people still didn't really resonate either, right? That there's games.
Yeah, and that was really we didn't really discontinue it. We still have it. Right. But the people don't really use it. That was the thing that stymied me. We do it for free. Right. It was just like it's available. Like we've done the different versions of okay, you have to come in, you have to buy something, you have to come in, you have to pay some amount to play, but you get that money on your account. I mean, there are game stores that just literally charge you just to come in the door, like a cover charge. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow, that seems much worse than like paying $10 and getting $10 of store credit. Like that seems like a no-brainer, right? Versus like coming in and paying $10 to hang out. But now for the last, year and a half, it's free to come in and play. There's no restrictions. You can just come in and play. And it's not that, the space is always full of people playing. So that's clearly not it. And I would argue that I don't necessarily even want people all playing here, right? It depends on the type of game you're playing. And are you playing with a private group or do you sort of want to play in a public space, right? And that's something I know for Russ that's very important, that you want to be out in the open to sort of testify to the power of games and say, be an ombudsman almost for the hobby and say, listen, these are awesome. Let me show you how much fun you can have playing games for the people that are just sort of walking by. But I would argue that getting games out into other third places is probably more beneficial than having them in game stores, right? Yeah. Playing in the Barnes & Noble Cafe or the Whole Foods Cafe or wherever, right, is going to get, or in the library or in your Boys and Girls Club, that's going to get games in front of people who would not come into the game store, period. Mm-hmm. So I would argue that that's actually the more important part of the third place theory, is that we want to make tabletop games acceptable to play in all these places. But the fundamental element of if you're going to use space, you have to be willing to recognize that there's costs associated with the space, and that just like the free shipping from Amazon ain't free, somebody pays for it. You're paying for it in higher prices. The vendor's paying for it by shipping it to you. Nothing's ever free, right? So the third space is not free. It's whatever you have. I think we should be looking about how do we get a better value out of it? And that's really where it comes back to the question of how much are you willing to pay for that? Yep. I mean, would you want a game lounge. Like, have you guys been to the Twin City Smoke Shop? Have you driven by that on exit 5 on 93?
I have not, but I know where you're talking about, though.
You can see it from the road. It's this big building. It was empty for years and years and years. And the cigar shop moved in there. And this building's probably 10,000, 20,000 square feet, something crazy. 2 levels. The entire, now I don't smoke cigars, but you can, first of all, you can smell the cigars when you're like within 50 yards of the place, right? But you walk in, if I smoke cigars, I went there to buy a gift for my brother-in-law who does smoke cigars. And so I walk in, downstairs is all like a shop, right? Upstairs is the entire freaking thing is a cigar lounge.
There you go. Yeah, right.
It's like, holy crap, that's amazing, right? Like, if I loved cigars, this would be the place that I would come to hang out. But I guarantee you that people that go to the cigar lounge don't walk in and just hang out all day and not buy anything.
Right.
Well, there's a reason for that. What is food? What are cigars? What are drinks?
Consumables, right.
They're consumables.
Right.
And so maybe if you could convince everybody to just publish legacy games,
right.
have people come in and play them and rip them up, then we might be able to sell people enough stuff. But yeah, it's just a matter of you have to cover those expenses somehow. I would love if you could have just like, hey, it's a game club, just straight up like they do in Europe, right? It's a game club, pay $20, you get to come in. That's it. That's all you get, right? You don't get any bonuses or whatever. You just get that you have a game club that you can come into. But then you have to deal with all the rules and regulations. Well, what if I want to bring a guest? What if you're breaking the rules? Who's going to enforce it? So all of those things add overhead. But I think it's a question of how much you're willing to pay. Because if you define the experience for me, I can tell you how much it's going to cost, right? We can all do that. We can just go, well, but I want to play at Dunkin' Donuts. It's like, well, that will cost you some amount of money. Let's call it $10 to $15 an evening.
A coffee and 2 donuts. That's what it'll cost you. So, well, there you have it. Thank you, Dan, for joining us here. And hopefully you listening at home, let us know what you think. And let Dan know. Email Dan, too, about does this make sense to you? Are you the kind of person who's like, yeah, I would pay for that? Or like, no, this is I don't need a place to play, or I think a third place should be something that stores offer as part of the shtick to help sell games, like the lounge in the cigar shop. Who knows? But anyway, so Dan, thank you so much for chatting with us, and we're looking forward to have you on the big show here
fun.
In about a week or so.
Thanks. Are all you guys on Twitter now? I know, Russ, you are. Craig, are you finally on Twitter?
Finally on Twitter? I am on Twitter, and you follow me, so you should know that.
I do. Okay, good. Well, I have my new Twitter thing, so I'm going to plug that because I just got
absolutely.
Do it, Dan.
Only like 4 years after Craig got on Twitter, I finally got my own account.
See?
Welcome to 2016.
I've been on there only under the company.
Being behind me on any kind of technology is sort of dangerous.
Right.
Well, I have my Game Salute account, my Myriad account, but now I've got my @Tabletop Tycoon. So if you want to follow me or chat at me there, that's a thing that I'm doing now.
Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, how do you spell Tycoon? Is it CH or?
It's the only way. Just look it up in any dictionary.
No.
Tycoon.
Now, are you sure?
Extraneous H came from.
Well, Russ's dictionary may have an H. I just don't know.
I am not constrained by your small-minded spelling system.
Right.
Okay.
Is it, let me ask you this, Craig. How do you spell your name? Is it Craig with a CH?
Craig. No, there's 2 R's. It's Craig. Craig.
And 3 G's at the end, right?
Well,
Exactly.
yeah, like, I'm not gonna, I'm not a conformist. Okay, I like to spell
no.
creatively.
You feel anyone who's only going to be able to spell a word one way is small-minded.
Right, exactly.
You're like Daniel Webster back in the day. We're just going to change the spelling of things for no reason.
Right.
Yeah, to sell more dictionaries.
Consistency is overrated. Well, thanks, Dan. We'll talk to you in the main show here in about a week.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.